Today's conference, Uyghurs, the 21st Century Genocide, this is the title we have just chosen for this conference, will start from a, I'd say, provocative question. Can we speak of a Uyghur genocide? So, in fact, few countries have recognized the repression of the Uyghurs as a genocide. And among them, there's, for example, Belgium, and recently also France, as according to a recent resolution of last week's voted by the French National Assembly. So the first speaker will be a member of the Belgian House of Representatives, who is also co-chair of the Interparliamentary Alliance in China, Mr. Samuel Cogolati. And I'd like to underline that he has actively contributed to the resolution that has led to the recognition of the Uyghur repression in Belgium as a genocide. Next, we will have from Marke Gregorova, Mrs. Marke Gregorova, who is a member of the European Parliament, who will talk about a work in relation to the Uyghur issue, highlighting the positions and also the actions of the European Parliament. Then we will move to the Uyghur voices. We have the pleasure to have today in this conference Mr. Mamtimin who is the European Union representative for the East Turkestan government in exile. And then we'll have Mrs. Sayragul Sauytbay. I'm so sorry if my pronunciation of her name is not correct. I'm sorry. Who is a survivor of the so-called re-education camps. We'll talk about our own experience with these camps and with what is going on in that region, Xinjiang. Then we will move to the final section of this conference, which has not legal background, in which we'll have first from Mr. Rodney Dixon, lead barrister and expert on the Uyghur repression, who will talk, among other things, about the role of the International Criminal Court. And next, we'll have for Mrs. Joanne Finley, who is a reader in Chinese studies at Newcastle University, who will speak about a long experience in studying the Uyghur repression. And finally, we'll have some time for some question and answers before the closing remarks by the president of Fight Impunity, Mr. Pierantonio Panzeri. So I think that I've spoken maybe too much, and I think we're ready to start this conference. And I give the floor to you, Mr. Cogolati. You will be the first speaker of this conference. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Giacomo. It's a real pleasure for me to join you for this important conference, and it's a real honor to take the floor next to so many distinguished speakers who have really contributed to the fight for the recognition of the Uyghur genocide. Not only in Europe, but all across the world. I will speak to you indeed about a specific experience, my own specific experience of fighting for the recognition of the Uyghur genocide and of the crimes against humanity against the Uyghur people in China, in Belgium, so in my own parliament. So I must tell you that I started to work on the Uyghur crisis when I met with a dad more than 2 years ago, actually the day after I was elected in parliament. So the very first question I raised in parliament just after I got elected was about a Uyghur family. The dad lived in Belgium as a Uyghur refugee, but his wife and 4 children tried to join him, passing by the Belgian embassy in Beijing in China. And they got arrested there by the Chinese police. And since then, they have been under arrest, under home arrest in Xinjiang. And that is actually how I discovered the awful conditions in which Uyghur people were actually living in China. And so by little, I met with other Uyghur refugees in Belgium, also in Europe, and I also started to read academic articles, notably by Joe Finley Smith, and some people were indeed already speaking at the time of genocide. And I am myself a lawyer by education. I did my PhD in international law. And I tried really to apply the Uyghur, the Genocide Convention of 1948 to the case of the Uyghur people. And together with other Belgian lawyers and scholars specialized under international law, we realized that basically the Uyghur crisis was, crossing all material elements of Article 2 of the 1948 Convention of the UN's. And so we thought we need to act, and we really need to try to pass a resolution in our parliament, in our legislative assembly, in order to recognize, formally speaking, that there is a genocide ongoing against the Uyghur people in China. And I can tell you that when we submitted that resolution, it was in February, so almost a year ago exactly. It was very difficult at start, extremely difficult. We got a lot of very negative backlash by other parties at first. Some people were arguing, well, you can have a genocide happening in countries like Rwanda or Bosnia, but clearly not in the first most powerful nation of the world, that is China. Other people argued that by trying to recognize the Uyghur genocide, I was actually diminishing the importance and gravity of the Shoah and of the Holocaust. So very grave accusations. And finally, and that was probably the most vicious type of arguments against the recognition of the Uyghur genocide, was, the business as usual. The idea that we shouldn't, complain about human rights violations, and certainly not raise the issues of crimes against humanity or of a genocide, because you would, prevent business and European business from happening and from succeeding in China. But we, in the end, as you know, succeeded. The whole path of recognition took a very long time in Belgium. We had several hearings in Parliament. You probably know that one hearing was cancelled due to a cyber attack against all Belgian institutions. We still don't know the origin, even though we can guess, but we don't know the origin of the cyber attack. We had to organize everything once again. But I think certainly one of the main contributions and one of the main positive factors for the recognition of the Uyghur genocide was the testimony of Uyghur refugees based in Europe. I think notably of Kelbi Nur Siddiq, who was in the camps and who could told us what really happened there, including cases of torture, rape, sexual violence, and forced sterilization of women. Her testimony was, I think, an eye-opener for most MPs in the Belgian parliament. But we also had academic evidence, notably by Professor Vanessa Franville from the Université Libre de Bruxelles. And she showed to all MPs, all parties, official, objective academic evidence that the Uyghur people is in real danger of extinction and extermination. And that has a name in international law, that is called genocide. And so for us, it was really important to break the silence and really to recognize that there is a genocide, but also crimes against humanity. Maybe a little element about the resolution as it was adopted in the end by all parties, excluding the Communist Party of Belgium, which abstained, a bit like in France two weeks ago. We recognize the serious risk of genocide. And that was seen by some commentators as a step back. But I think it wouldn't be very right, and I think it is important to consider that Article 1 of the Genocide Convention requires states not only to condemn, but also to prevent any serious risk of ongoing genocide happening now. And so in the end, I think it was actually a positive development, because we really required our governments to take all necessary steps in order to stop and to prevent the ongoing genocide from, continuing. And in that sense, I think that that resolution, as adopted a few months ago, was a real breakthrough, because it was the first time that, we didn't wait years after the genocide, for example, of Rwanda in 1994, but we really acted now. And I think that was really important. And we really compelled our government to act and to take real positive measures in order for those mass atrocities to stop. And I think of three concrete measures, and then I will stop and give the floor to other people, of course. But one is to try to stop and to ban imports of products from Uyghur forced labor. I think that is very important to say we stop business as usual. We do have a responsibility in Europe as massive importers of products from forced labor in China to change those trade relationships. Second, we also decided to freeze all negotiations about the investment agreement between China and the EU. The agreement was frozen from the European Parliament, but I think the states also have a responsibility, the member states, as member of the Council. And so we require the Belgian government to say we freeze that agreement. And finally, we still have 10 extradition treaties which are still into force between European member states and China. And I think it is really important to call our member states like Belgium to stop and to terminate that kind of extradition agreements, which really represent a risk, a huge risk to the lives of, not only Uyghur people, but also refugees from Hong Kong or the Tibet region. So that's it for me. But as you saw, I think that fight for the recognition of the Uyghur genocide in Belgium was successful thanks to the support of so many academics, civil society, and the Uyghur people themselves, but also, of course, parliamentarians from all around the world. You mentioned that I was part of and co-chair of IPAC. I think it is because we, stood together, that we led the same fight in Czech Republic, in Lithuania, in the Netherlands, in the UK, or in Canada, that we were able to succeed in Belgium, and no later than 2 weeks ago, also in France. And I'm really, really proud that we can, succeed this kind of fights because we stand together. Thank you.
Should I take the word immediately?
Thank you. So thank you for your contribution to the debate. I do appreciate the great value of your political commitment to this issue, to the Uyghur issue, because first of all, because as you told, it started from people, from just meeting people, meeting just victims. And so it is close to people. And of course, even if, and in fact, it goes on, even if there are so many obstacles on the way, of course, which we have to get over. So thank you again, and I'll proceed giving the floor to the next speaker, Mrs. Gregorova, member of the European Parliament. Thank you, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And well, I will probably have very similar points to the speaker before me. Well, it just means that we are right? However, thank you very much for having me and inviting me with such esteemed panelists. I'm really honored to speak here. And well, the question posed by our panel, this panel, really answers itself. Xinjiang is nowadays, unfortunately, synonymous with torture, brainwashing, rape, sterilizations, disappearances, and complete surveillance. And as the Chinese Communist Party attempts to hide their crimes against humanity with ever increasingly absurd explanations, I have to say that our democratic institutions are quite slow to react meaningfully. And there has been no denying from their side or our side that genocide is taking place, and diplomatic reactions were and are taking place. And allow me to mention a few just to get the context. In 2019, the European Parliament, we awarded the Sakharov Prize for Freedom and Thought to Ilham Tohti, an important and symbolic gesture, although also a decision that strengthened China's resolve to isolate Mr. Tohti or any information about him and his current state. Last March, the European Union ambassadors agreed on sanctions, including travel bans and asset freezes against 4 Chinese officials and 1 Chinese entity for human rights abuses against Uyghurs. And among those sanctions by the EU was, for instance, the architect of the internment camp system. So that has been, let's say, a step forward in a direction that also Mr. Cogolati was talking about, something real, some bans or sanctions. And equally, the European Parliament and many national governments have recognized and condemned China's genocide, as I said, at least on the diplomatic level. My own Czech Senate passed a unanimous motion condemning abuses against the Uyghurs as both genocide and crimes against humanity only months ago, with similar declarations by Belgium, France, the UK, Finland, Netherlands, and Lithuania. I do hope I did not miss one, because this is an important notion. And the United States has gone further, requiring the assumption that all Xinjiang goods are made with forced labor and therefore banned. And that is really a huge step forward. That is really something that all of us should follow through. And US blacklisting of Chinese companies such as Huawei, Hikvision, or CloudWalk for building and maintaining the total surveillance system in Xinjiang is also very good step forward and very practical, if I may say so. And however, even if I say that there has been some practical steps, still a lot of these are quite diplomatic. And I need to ask, or we need to ask, if these diplomatic means really did anything for millions of Uyghurs living in this brutal dystopia. And as long as the CCP perceives our Western actions as a lip service on the one hand, and witnesses increasing economic cooperation between the West and China at the same time, the outside costs for Beijing will just not outweigh their justification for committing these crimes. On a specific note of what can be done, my colleagues and I have drafted new law last year that prohibits our cutting-edge surveillance and spyware to be sold to regimes like the CCP. It's a dual-use regulation. Yet member states, again, are slow to even negligent to enforce these new rules, as they are often themselves benefiting from this technology. And it is indeed a fight we say we are fighting, but we kind of wave a white flag simultaneously. And that should stop if something is to change. And I know I sound quite harsh with my institutions, my colleague, and Europe as a whole. I do realize that the world is not black and white. But, you know, when one side is painting all of our white and gray to black, to use this metaphor fully, then we can't pretend that just gray will solve it. And economic and diplomatic sanctions, the withdrawal of FDI, suspension from global standard setting bodies, boycott of the Olympics, and further economic steps can be taken and are very concrete measures until really independent UN observers will be able to witness the release of millions of Uyghurs and the end of the genocide camps in Xinjiang. So I do hope that this is a way in which we can proceed. And of course, I will be very much looking for the inputs of you, of others, because as a politician, I should be and I am at your service. So thank you for the attention, and also allow me to show you my slightly activistic t-shirt, which we took a photo action with in the European Parliament, which might seem as a support of the Olympics, but no, it actually is against the slave labor in Xinjiang. Thank you.
So thank you again for for the speech and for having shared your experience and your work inside this institution, inside the European Parliament. Thank you for having also spoken about the importance of considering the commercial and economic side of this difficult relation with China. Of course, we are now going on to, and of course, I would like to say sorry, and thank you for your availability. We know that we have someone at the European Parliament we can count on. So thank you. We now go to Dr. Mamtimin Ala. I'll now give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about the Uyghur genocide, which is still ravaging now, as aggressive as before. Let me start with the latest good news, though it sounds odd to use the word as good news in the midst of this genocide. The French Parliament adopted a non-binding resolution on last Thursday, officially recognizing, I quote, the violence perpetrated by the People's Republic of China against the Uyghurs as constituting crimes against humanity and genocide. This is again a major move in the recognition of the Uyghur genocide as the worst humanitarian catastrophe of the 20th century, along with the US Congress, Canadian, the UK, Dutch, Belgian, and Lithuanian parliaments. Today, I would like to focus very briefly on the transnational oppression of Uyghurs by China as part of the China's genocide against Uyghurs. Here, I provoke your memories of the SS St. Louis tragedy. On certain May 1939, a ship called SS St. Louis as a luxury cruise liner with 900 Jewish who fled Germany abroad was not allowed by many countries to disembark, but were eventually turned away in Havana and forced to return to Europe, where more than 250 were killed by the Nazis. The same tragedy is unfortunately and sadly happening to Uyghurs now, who, though not on any cruise ship, are being repatriated back to China. In some cases, Interpol is assisting China in deportation of Uyghurs who are caught at the airports of some countries. It has been revealed recently by a whistleblower that UNHRC had previously and repeatedly shared the names of the Uyghurs who submitted to it the documents about the human rights violations of China to Chinese authorities, which punished their family members back home immediately and mercilessly. And sadly, no action has been taken on this revelation to date. Uyghurs are being deported from Muslim countries, including Egypt, Pakistan, Turkey, and in other Central Asian countries, including Tajikistan, and facing deportations in Saudi Arabia and Morocco. This has become serious humanitarian violations now that nobody is doing anything against it. More than 7,000 Uyghurs were deported from Egypt in 2017, right after the inception of the Uyghur genocide at China's request. Currently, the Turkish government has suddenly canceled the permanent residency status of many Uyghurs after the recent visit of its foreign minister to China. These Uyghurs hold an expired Chinese passport and have nowhere to go, but are deeply scared to be deported back to China. More than 100 Uyghurs and Kazakhs have recently secretly been arrested and deported from unrest-stricken Kazakhstan to China. Another tragic news came to the surface the other day that the Pakistani government assisted China in deportation of 14 Uyghurs who were shot dead at the Chinese border. This list goes on and on. China is using its economic leverage to hunt down Uyghurs almost all around the world in a frighteningly heinous way. At this stage, many Uyghurs abroad are symbolically on the SSSD Louis cruise ship. They have nowhere to go and nobody cares about them. Apart from this humanitarian catastrophe, Uyghur asylum seekers in some countries are stuck in a long queue to wait for the result of the asylum claims. In the US, for example, the asylum claims of more than 100 Uyghurs are not being processed, even though the US is the first country to recognize the Uyghur genocide. From this, we can see that only a few countries have recognized the Uyghur genocide and that there is no substantial action to be taken to help Uyghurs and stop this genocide despite or after this recognition. At this stage, the EU keeps its silence over the Uyghur genocide. With no prospect of international pressure, China feels confident and competent to continue with this genocide, which is shameful blow to all the great lofty ideals of humanity, including the ideals of the EU in terms of international justice, Geneva Convention on Crimes Against Humanity and Genocide, and other international conventions. As the East Turkestan government in exile, we ask the EU and other EU member states first to recognize this genocide, second, to boycott the upcoming Olympic Games, and third, to help the victims of this genocide and in Europe and beyond. And number four, to hold China accountable for its crimes against humanity and genocide, and also assist, in our case, to bring China to the International Criminal Court for its crimes against humanity and genocide. At this stage, Uyghurs are getting more and more hopeless and helpless in the absence of any promising action. We are depressingly bearing witness to our demise that the slogan "never again" is turning into the slogan "never mind." This is a dangerous sign that is setting a precedent for other crimes against humanity that will soon be looming on the horizon of the world. So now it's so urgent for us to be to survive, and hence we need urgent action. Otherwise, it's too late for us again to say that never again, because never again is happening now and here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Ala, for your intervention. Thank you for having spoken about the role of the Chinese authorities and for having spoken about how other countries are acting in relation to this issue and the collaboration with the Chinese authorities. For example, I think of, for example, some days ago or just a week ago, Saudi Arabia just was about to, and maybe is about to, return to China in full violation of the principle of non-refoulement to Uyghurs, which were arbitrarily detained in the country since November 2020. So, of course, we have to also think of how all the other countries are acting and how they collaborate with China in carrying on this repression. So, thank you again, and now we will go to Mrs. Sayragul Sauytbay. I just would like to underline that she won't speak in English, so she will intervene, she will have her speech, and I kindly ask her to make some stops during her speech in order to allow Mr. Ala to gradually translate in English her speech. Okay, so the floor is yours. Thank you. Maybe Mr. Ala just can translate it.
I explain one thing, that she speaks everything in Uyghur first, whole text, short text, and then I will translate the whole text back into English, and then translation will go in parallel with English translation.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I have to interrupt you because I noticed that Mrs. Finley has just raised her hands. Sorry, maybe before going on. No? Okay, so we can go on. Sorry.
Sayragul adı sizge keldi. Siz okuyup etсеңіз, мен ақысын тәржім қылайын. Қане, сөз сізде.
Сәлеметсіздер ме? Аса құрметті Еуропа парламентінің мүшелері және қадірлі меймандар. Бүгін сіздердің маған осы Қытайдың жаза лагеріндегі қорқынышты ахуалдарды сөйлеп беру орайын бергендіктеріңіз үшін алғысымды білдіремін. Менің аты жөнім Sayragul Sauytbay, ұлтым қазақ. Мен Қытай өкіметінің Шығыс Түркістан халқына жүргізіп жатқан геноцид, қырғыншылық саясатының құрбаны және фашистік концлагерінің тірі куәгері боламын. Қытай Компартиясының бұл геноцид саясаты алдын ала жоспарланған. Бұл жауыздық жоспарын сәтті түрде іске асыру үшін Қытай өкіметі алдымен біздің ана тілімізді, дінімізді және біздің дәстүрлі ұлттық мәдениетімізді жоюдан бастаған. 2016 жылы күзден бастап бұл геноцид саясатын ресми жолға қойды, ресми бастады. Алдымен қолдан жасаған түрлі жалған қылмыстарды тағу арқылы жалпы беттік тұтқындауды бастады. Менің көршілерім, достарым, жерлестерім, таныстарым сөйтіп жарым түнде үйге бастырып берген сақшылар жағынан қолға алынып, белгісіз жақтарға кетіліп жатты. Сақшы машиналары сигнал аваздарын, сигнал дауысын қойып беріп, 24 сағат күндіз-түн айналып шарлап жүретін болды. Халықты үрей биледі. Енді олар іш киімдерін сомкаға салып, босаға іліп қойып, дайындықпенен жататын болды. Қытай өкіметі менің отбасымның Қазақстанда екендігін сылтау етіп, маған қысым көрсетіп, қиын қыспаққа алды, ұрып соқты. Онымен қоймай мәжбүрлеп, мені фашистік концлагеріне апарып, сонда мұғалім болуға мәжбүрледі. Мен мұғалім болған сол бір ғана жаза лагерінің өзінде қамалған 2500-ге жуық адам бар. Ер, әйел, үлкен кіші, қоғамның әр саласының адамдары бар. Барлығы күнәсіз адамдар болатын. Олар сол Шығыс Түркістандағы жергілікті халықтың, Uyghur, Қазақ, Қырғыз қатарлы жергілікті халықтың өкілдері еді. Шығыс Түркістандағы Uyghur, Қазақ, Қырғыз қатарлы барлық халық осы Қытай Компартиясының геноцид саясатының құрбаны болды. Жаза лагеріндегі қызмет күн тәртібі өте мұқият, жан-жақтылы орналастырған болып, бұл жердегі ең маңыздысы барлық қызмет орналастыру Пекиннің біртұтас бұйрығымен болады. Олар алдымен адамды ұстайды, артынан оның қылмысын тұрақтандырады. Жаза лагеріндегі әртүрлі қызметші сақшылар қамалған адамдарды мүлде адам қатарында көрмейді. Пекин үкіметі оларға шексіз құқықты берген. Олар адам өлтірсе де олардың ешқандай жауапкерлік қозғастырылмайды. Сондықтан олар өздерінің қалағандарын істей алады. Егер бір адам жаза лагеріне қамалатын болса, онда олардың отбасы мүшелері және оның туыс-туғандары төтелей осы істің зардабын тартады, әсер етеді. Жаза лагеріндегі әр адамның денсаулық архиві болады. Осы денсаулық архивіндегі белгі қойылған денсаулығы жақсы және адамдарменен жастар кейіннен тұйықсыз жоғалып кететін адамдардың объектісіне айналып кетті. Жаза лагеріндегі қамалған адамдарды тек 3 түрлі нәубет күтіп тұрады. Бұның біріншісі өмірінен айырылу, екіншісі денсаулығынан айырылу, үшіншісі рухани кеселге душар болу. Егер оларды жаза лагерінен қойып шығарып жіберсе де, бәрібір де олардың өмірі ұзаққа бармайды. Қытай Компартиясы 70 неше түрлі қолдан жасалған жалған қылмыстарды қолдан жасау арқылы бір бөлім адамдарды жаза лагеріне қамаса, енді бір бөлім адамдарды түрмеге қамап, оларды заңсыз түрде ұзақ жылдарға соттады. Ата-анасы қамалып кетіп, қараусыз қалған балаларды барлығын жинап, балалар лагеріне алып кетті. Қытай Компартиясы өзінің геноцид, осы қырғыншылық саясатын өнімді түрде іске асырумен бір уақытта ол сол бейгүнә адамдардан есепсіз экономика жаратады. Мысалы, оларды құлдық еңбектерге салу, олардан қан алу, олардың шаштарын алып, оны саудаға салу және орган аткезшілігінің келу қайнарын дайындап беру қатарлылар. Әйелдердің басқыншылыққа ұшырауы жаза лагеріндегі ең көп ұшырайтын ахуал болып, бұл әдеттегісі айналып кеткен. Әуелі десеңіз, жауыздықпенен кезектесіп басқыншылық жасау ахуалы да біздің көз алдымызда өтті. Жаза лагеріндегі камерасыз қара үй, арнаулы қинау жазалау жүргізетін үй болып, ол үйден аянышты дауыстарды біз үнемі естіп тұрамыз. Жазалауға сол қара үйге алып кеткен адамдардың кейбіреуі қайтып келмейді. Мен олардың сол қинау барысында өліп қалғандығын білемін. Олар бедеулікті келтіріп шығаратын аса зиянды өкілдарларды қамалған адамдарға мәжбүр салады. Олар осыны қабылдауға мәжбүр болады. Және бұл өкілдарлардың орталық нерв системасын бұзатын, денсаулықты ауыр дәрежеде зияндайтын түрлі аса ауыр зардаптар да бар. Олар әртүрлі қорқынышты, рахымсыз қинау жазалау тәсілдерін қолданумен бірлікте қамалған адамдарға рухани жақтан қысым жүргізу арқылы олардың жоқ қылмысын мәжбүрлеп мойындатады, және олардың өзінің табиғатынан бас тартып, тек қана компартияға ғана сенуге мәжбүрлейді. Жақында ғана Қазақстанда болған осы қаңтар трагедиясында Қазақстан өкіметі бейгүнә халықты қырғындау үшін әртүрлі жауыз әдістердің барлығын іске салды. Қазақстан президенті Қасым-Жомарт Тоқаев күнәсіз халықты терроршы деді, және есепсіз бейгүнә адамдардың қырылуын келтіріп шығарды. Оның барлығы, осы істеген істерінің барлығы фашист Қытай өкіметімен бірдей. Олардың бәрі терроршы деген қалпақты қолдан жасап кидіру арқылы күнәсіз халықты қалағанша бастырып жауыздық жасайды. Бұл дәлел Қытай Компартиясының геноцид қырғыншылығын көршілес мемлекеттерге сіңіп кеткендігін көрсетіп береді. Ертең дүниенің басқа елдерде де таралып кете ме жоқ па, оған ешкім кепілдік бере алмайды. Ең соңында менің талап ететінім біріншісі.
Almost finished.
Yes, maybe it's just better to make some stops in order to translate gradually her speech. Thank you.
Yeah. It's all translated.
Менің соңында талап ететінім біріншісі, мен барлық Еуропа мемлекеттерінен Қытайдың қыстық олимпия жарысын дипломатик бойкот жариялауға шақырамын. Екіншісі, мен талап ететінім, мен Еуропа парламентінен Қытайға тіпті де қаттық жаза жүргізуді талап етемін. Үшінші, мен Еуропа парламентінен Қытайдың қылмысын геноцид деп ресми түрде мойындауды талап етемін. Төртінші, мен Еуропа парламентінен ең ауыр жаза жүргізу және өлімді әрекет қолдану арқылы Қытай үкіметінің геноцид қырғыншылығын тоқтатуды талап етемін. Барлықтарыңызға рахмет.
So now I will translate the whole speech quite briefly. Just I will start.
Thank you.
Okay, so dear members of Parliament and other guests, thanks for giving me this opportunity to speak about my horrific experiences in China's concentration camps. My name is Sayragul Sauytbay of Kazakh ethnicity, and I am a living victim of the genocide policies of the Chinese government against the peoples of Turkestan and of its fascistic concentration camps. To carry out this genocide, the Chinese Communist Party has already started to destroy our language, religion, and other cultural heritages as a pre-planned process since 2016. In that year, the Chinese government arrested a great number of people on the basis of bogus accusations, and my neighbors, friends, and others in my town were arrested by police who stormed their home at night. At that time, sirens could be heard night in and night out. Out of fear, people went to bed with their clothes on. Secondly, the Chinese government exerted enormous pressure on me with a threat leveled against my relatives in Kazakhstan. They forced me to be a teacher at concentration camps. There were more than 2,500 inmates, old and young, male and female, incarcerated in that camp. The daily operational procedures of the camps were meticulously arranged in line with the guidance of Beijing. They would arrest the people first, then they would decide their crimes later. The camp staff don't consider the inmates as human beings. Beijing has given them unlimited power that they are not punished for anything, including murder. Hence, they can do anything. Number three, if a person were put in a camp, this would have huge impact on the whole family. There was a health logbook for everybody in the camp. Those who were young and healthy are registered on the logbook were disappeared suddenly and frequently. There were three possibilities that everybody there would inevitably face. The first is to die or to be killed. Second one, to lose one's health. And third is to be mentally ill. Even if they were released, they wouldn't and couldn't live longer. To justify the incarceration of the inmates in the camps, the Chinese government fabricated more than 70 types of crimes against which the people were illegally judged and then sentenced. The children of those who are incarcerated in camps were also sent into their children's camps as well. In the meanwhile, to achieve the goal of this genocide, the CCP, or Chinese Communist Party, made money out of the lives of innocent people there. For example, to force them to do slave labor, to take the blood from them against their will, and to sue their hair for commercial benefits, and to secure the resources of organ harvesting, etc. and etc. Number 4, the rape of women was a most common incident in the camps. Even violent gang rapes happened right before our eyes. In the rooms called black rooms, where there were no cameras, torture was widely applied to inmates. We heard horrible screams out of these rooms. Some of the inmates who were taken to these rooms did not return. I assume that they were tortured to death. Female inmates were forced to accept the contraception drugs, which had negative impact on their mental and physical health. Along with physical torture, they also apply mental torture to the inmates, forcing them to accept their so-called crimes and to denounce their humanness. During the tragic unrest in January this year in Kazakhstan, the Kazakh government used cruel methods against its citizens, and Kazakh president called the innocent people terrorists. As a result, many innocent people lost their lives. This process resembles that of the fascist CCP. Both governments, the Chinese and Kazakh governments, use terrorism charges as a subterfuge to suppress the innocent people. This indicates that the genocidal methods of the CCP have already spread into other neighboring countries, for example, into Kazakhstan. Nobody can guarantee that this method will not be adopted by other regimes and governments in the future around the world. At the end of my testimony, I urge the EU member states to boycott the upcoming Olympics, as China, which is committing genocide against innocent people, has no right to hold it. And secondly, I request that EU apply more punitive measures to China to stop this genocide. And number 3, I request that EU member states or more EU member states recognize the crimes that the CCP is committing is genocide, and the EU and its member states to support our case against Chinese officials at the International Criminal Court. And number 4, I urge that the EU Parliament takes effective steps to stop this genocide. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you, Dr. Ala, for having translated for all of us Mrs. Sauytbay's speech. I would like to thank her for, of course, sharing here I just can address directly to her. I would like to, Mr. Sauytbay, thank you for having shared your touching and at the same time tragic experience. And I think that having the possibility to listen to the direct witness of what's going on in those camps is really important for us to have a clear idea. So thank you again. Maybe Dr. Ala can translate this my sentences to her, and then we can go.
Sayragul Hanım, sizdeki bugünkü özünüzdeki şu Xitayninki jaza lagerda ko'rgan ishlaringizni, ya'niki shu birinchi shaxs sifatida beshingizni o'tkazgan bu ishlarning hammani bizdan o'rtoqlashganligingiz uchun intayin rahmat aytamiz. Sizningki mushundaq bugun bizga aniqlikda ham to'g'rilikda mushu bergan bir guvohligingiz biz uchun intayin muhim. Buning uchun biz sizga rahmat aytamiz.
So thank you again. So we can now go to the third section of this conference, which, as I told at the beginning, has a more legal background. So Mr. Dixon will start, and so I give you the floor. Ms. Dixon. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm going to speak about the ICC case that we have launched on behalf of the East Turkestan government in exile and countless Uyghur victims, where we are asking the ICC to open an international investigation into the allegations of genocide and crimes against humanity. We filed this case over a year ago and have submitted evidence to the prosecutor, urging the prosecutor, the new prosecutor now, to open that investigation immediately. The purpose of the investigation would be to gather all the relevant evidence where the court has jurisdiction, and I'll talk a little bit about that soon, and then to look to bring prosecutions of persons where there is sufficient evidence. So our aim is to look to achieve justice wherever that is possible. Because as things stand, I think, as all the speakers have emphasized, there is currently zero investigation going on at the international level in relation to these horrific crimes. Many other situations around the world, we look at Syria, Yemen, Myanmar, even what's happening now in the Ukraine. There is an international focus on those situations and an international investigation going on. But what is happening in China is the gaping gap in the fight against impunity. It is staggering to think that while these crimes, and we've heard just a snapshot of that today, I mean, that's a drop in the ocean. While these massive crimes are going on, there's no commitment on behalf of the international community to investigate the allegations. This is unheard of. I think one of the strong characteristics and encouraging characteristics of the last 20 years since the establishment of the Yugoslav tribunal following the breakup of the former Yugoslavia is that whenever there have been allegations of massive human rights violations, the world community has responded effectively by either setting up an ad hoc court or looking at an international investigation through the UN or through Geneva, even if they aren't able to set up a court, at least preserving the evidence, or other steps being taken to ensure that a signal goes out to the perpetrators that this is not just being ignored. And yet here we have a situation where exactly the opposite is happening. It's reversing the trend. We're going back to where we were before the euphoria of the 1990s, back into the Cold War, where no allegations were ever investigated. I thought we had, and I think we all believed that we'd gone beyond that to say now, even if there isn't a court, well, at least the international community must get together to ensure that a proper investigation is launched. Here we have a court. Fortunately, we have the ICC, a permanent body now established. We don't have to go to the Security Council, where inevitably this would get blocked by China itself. The court exists and the prosecutor has proprio motu powers. That means powers of his own accord to launch an investigation where there is jurisdiction. And to sum it up, without going into too much of the legal technicalities, we say there is clear jurisdiction, and there's ample evidence of this, because crimes are being committed by the Chinese authorities on ICC state party territory. In particular, Tajikistan, who are signed up, they are a neighboring country, and Cambodia, and there's Afghanistan as well. Tajikistan, as ICC territory, means that if Chinese operatives come into that territory, as they are doing, and they pick up Uyghurs and force them back into China, where they're never heard of again, there's clear jurisdiction for the court to act. The court is doing that at the moment in the Myanmar situation, where Myanmar is not signed up, but because persons were forced from there into Bangladesh, which is signed up, the court has started an investigation. And exactly the same principle we say should apply here. This is not only an act that violates international law to come into another state like that and essentially enforce disappear persons, but it is also, we say, the first step in the alleged genocide. Of course, there are many acts going on inside of China that we've heard about some of today. But another aspect or strand to this is that China is going around to many countries. We've heard about Egypt, Saudi Arabia, but Tajikistan as well, Cambodia, who are signed up, and rounding up Uyghurs there to force them back into China, where they are then targeted and persecuted. So it's the first step in a continuum that ends up in the targeting and destruction of the group, which constitutes genocide and crimes against humanity. And because one of the key elements of the crime, the first step, people have to be detained and arrested and forced over the border, takes place on ICC territory, the court has jurisdiction then over the whole crime as a continuing crime. This is a basic principle of criminal law. This is not something that is being made up conveniently for the situation. If a crime starts in one of our countries and continues into another and then into a third, all of those countries have jurisdiction over the whole crime, providing that a key element takes place on your territory. So it is a well-established principle of criminal law that has been recognized in the Myanmar case, and it should now be applied here without any hesitation, without any fear or favor for the country involved. Yes, China is a very powerful country, but that's not a consideration that the court should be taking into account. Quite the opposite. Vulnerable victims more than ever need protection from states like that. And where there's jurisdiction, we're not looking to stretch the law here or make it up. Where there's proper legal foundation, then the court should act. We have provided this evidence to the prosecutor. We're going to be providing more in the coming weeks and months. And what we are urging all of those who are following our case is to support it, to give it publicity, and to encourage the prosecutor to do the right thing and open such an investigation. We have seen where the international focus and pressure grows, it's more likely that the court will act. That certainly happened in the Myanmar case, and it equally needs to apply here now. The prosecutor needs to be encouraged and shown the right way and given comfort that this is something that many states and the international community as a whole supports, because nowhere else is it happening. It's not happening through the UN, so it should happen through the ICC. There hasn't been an investigation opened in Central Asia throughout the court's time. There have been investigations in Africa, South America, Eastern Europe, but nothing in Central Asia. So this is also an opportunity for the court to show its true international character and balance. So we are both urging that level of support and profile, but then also where countries have evidence and information, particularly where persons are being rounded up and forced into China, to provide that to the court. This is a classic component of genocide. It happened in the Second World War, where Jews were rounded up in other countries and forced back in to Germany, where they were then targeted. One cannot make direct comparisons about any genocide, but often you see the same characteristics emerging. China doesn't want Uyghur populations in other countries having a normal life, having prominence, getting on with showing that they are not all involved in terrorist activities and this kind of fake allegation that China has been making. And also they don't want persons outside actively campaigning for those who are suffering inside. So they want to silence them. They want to ensure that they're there under their control within China. We urge you then to follow what we are doing, to lend your support wherever possible, and of course to take into account that the real purpose of influence is to speak out for those who have no influence, those who have no voice. It's not about us who have that ability. It's about those who at this stage are vulnerable, gagged, and at the mercy of authorities that are completely turning a blind eye to all criticism. They're simply denying it entirely. And that's why it is so important that a light is shone on this through an international investigation. The ICC is the perfect body to do it. It was established precisely for these massive crimes. And yes, it can't do everything around the world, but surely this is a crime scene that must be exposed and investigated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon, for your contribution. So I would like to underline that since, as you told before, at an international level, this issue is not adequately addressed, we have decided that trying to put it together, different figures, different personalities coming from different institutions or experiences to focus as Fight Impunity organization on this theme, on this issue. I would also like to thank you for having remarked the role or the importance of the ICC in the problem just deriving from the fact that China is not a signatory of the Rome Statute, but at the same time, it is still possible to do something since these crimes start somewhere else. So, and they continue in China. So it is possible to do something. So thank you. And now we can proceed to Mrs. Smith-Finley. So I'll give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giacomo. Yeah, I'm really, really honoured and humbled to be speaking among all of you here today, politicians and lawyers and activists and advocates who are working so hard to make this harm to the Uyghurs stop. So yeah, I'm one of the academic community who's been working on Xinjiang and the Uyghur region for a very long time. Since about 1990, I've been researching the Uyghur situation within China. Yeah, I would just like to start my comments by highlighting 2 points to begin with. Firstly, we've already amassed an enormous volume of evidence for the PRC's atrocity crimes that are being committed in the Uyghur homeland. And this massive evidence has been aired at the Uyghur Tribunal held in London throughout 2021, and also at a 3-day conference held at my institution, Newcastle University, last September. But the information, it's important to remember that the information we have, colossal as it is, remains the very, very tip of the iceberg, as Rodney Dixon also stressed. And as Hamid Sabi, the counsel to the Uyghur Tribunal, also reminded us in December. And horrifying information continues to emerge in drips and drabs about policies conceived and acts committed stretching all the way back to 2014. So, for instance, the full extent of the leaked Xinjiang papers, the Chinese Communist Party papers, was disclosed only in September 2021, following the second hearing of the Uyghur Tribunal. And just this week, we've heard from Radio Free Asia how a court in Korla in Xinjiang had sentenced 5 Uyghur women from one family to lengthy jail terms for so-called illegal religious activities in 2019. They were housewives and a civil servant, an elderly mother of 78, her 3 daughters, her daughter-in-law. They were given prison terms of between 7 and 20 years for allegedly hearing and providing a venue for illegal religious preaching, supposedly disturbing public order and inciting ethnic hatred. But what had they done in practice? They had followed traditional Uyghur customs. They had visited one another at home to talk about their children, their families, their quality of life, and to sharpen their religious knowledge. They never had any political or anti-government talks. They spoke only to one another about how to be traditionally good Muslims. And in the state's eyes, those simple gatherings have been treated as a crime against the country. The second point I want to make is that people are still being detained. So there is still something to see in the Uyghur region, despite China's official narratives of there being nothing to see, despite the Disneyfied version of society that is being presented to the tourists' gaze. So an academic colleague wrote just this week, to share the news that a close friend from Pichang County named Alim Mahsud had recently been detained for a second time. This is a journalist, 38 years old. He was first detained in 2018. He was transferred into forced labor in 2019, then allowed to return home. And now he's been detained once more. And this current detention comes at a time when his second wife has recently given birth to twin babies. So Rodney Dixon, QC, has talked to us about the ICC. There is, of course, also the International Court of Justice and the role of the UN Human Rights Council, thorny as that issue, as that route is. So, you know, last year, the HRC, the Human Rights Council, passed resolutions condemning abuses in many places: Afghanistan, Burundi, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Myanmar, Sudan, Syria. But again, as it has always been, it was silent on China's abuses in Xinjiang. Now, on January this year, America took its seat on the council once again, for the first time since 2018. And we need America, in conjunction with like-minded nations among the 47 members of the council, to shine a light on what is happening in Xinjiang. So far, at the UN, we've seen dozens of governments making annual joint statements decrying China's behavior, calling for free access to Xinjiang for Michelle Bachelet, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And we've also seen special rapporteurs appointed by the UN issuing a rare statement condemning China's abuses, not only in Xinjiang, but also in Hong Kong and Tibet. But of course, the 47-member Human Rights Council, while it is free to speak up, it has rotating temporary members and no vetoes allowed to any members. Despite that fact, China under Xi Jinping has built so much influence in the UN, placing diplomats in senior and junior roles and becoming the second largest funder after America to the UN's budget. So the issue here then is whether the US and others on the council can gain the support of other member countries who have strong economic ties with China, indeed who may be held in relations of debt diplomacy. So to give an example, in June, Ukraine backed out of a joint statement criticizing China after Chinese diplomats reportedly threatened to withhold coronavirus vaccines from the country. And in the meantime, we wait for Ms. Bachelet to produce her long-awaited independent report, said to be imminent following the judgment of the Uyghur Tribunal that was published on the 9th of December. In terms of national government actions, the UK last week on 20th of January held a debate led by Nusrat Ghani MP, in which she and others called for the British government to impose additional sanctions against Chinese officials. These are Magnitsky sanctions, and also to enact import blacklists. One thing I would say about Magnitsky sanctions is that Magnitsky sanctions being designed to prevent perpetrators from traveling to certain countries may actually be self-defeating, in the sense that another legal channel we might use to hold China to account is that of universal jurisdiction. So in countries like Germany or in Argentina, so in Germany at the moment, we have seen several successful cases recently of Syrian perpetrators being brought to justice via the universal jurisdiction process. And of course, if we want to effect arrests in a universal jurisdiction case, we need to allow perpetrators to travel. So that's just one potential contradiction with the Magnitsky regime, I think. Ian Duncan-Smith MP, speaking last week, has said they, the government, the UK government, if they suspect such a thing is happening in Xinjiang, it is inherent on them to be able to pursue it, to have an urgent assessment of whether it considers the Uyghurs to be at serious risk of genocide. How much more are we willing to stand by and watch, and all for the sake of cheaper goods? So calling for that import blacklist to be initiated, which so far the UK government has refused to do. In the US this week, we see the America Competes Act of 2022, which has introduced an important provision to designate Uyghurs as prioritized refugees of special humanitarian concern. And hopefully this may start to ease the bottleneck situation that Mamtimin was describing just before. This will enable refugees in the US to be processed under priority 2 under the refugee resettlement priority system, and will allow them to access the US without a referral from the UNHCR, an embassy or an NGO. So finally, the academy. Obviously, I'm from academia. What can institutions do and what can individual scholars do? The academy, I think the most important thing is the need to address the threat of PRC funding of Western universities and the ways in which that funding can be used to silence and indeed to bend the narrative on Xinjiang and indeed Hong Kong and Tibet and Taiwan coming out of Western academic institutions. So of course we have an egregious example this week in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, of the Vrije Universiteit, the Free University in Amsterdam, having been challenged by Dutch media in a situation where it had accepted a huge amount of money from the Southwest University of Political Science and Law in Chongqing in China, and in return, that money had gone to its Cross-Cultural Human Rights Center, and in return, the Cross-Cultural Human Rights Center had published various posts on its website rejecting Western criticisms of China's human rights policy, and its academics had concluded that there is definitely no discrimination of Uyghurs or other minorities in the Uyghur region. That position has now been reversed, and the Vrije Universiteit has said that it will not only accept no further money from this Chinese academic institution, but it will also repay the sums it recently received. And this has been an enormous scandal. So this is something for foreign academic institutions to watch very, very carefully for. And finally, as scholars, you know, a lot of the scholars in the field of Xinjiang studies and Uyghur studies have become scholar activists by default, really, over the last 4 to 5 years, as we watched our colleagues and friends and the broader community disappearing and coming under attack in the Uyghur homeland. So as scholars, we can undertake multiple projects. We should not be silent. We cannot be silent. We can undertake multiple projects, always on the basis of rigorous evidence, in order to, if you like, in the words of a famous anti-racist scholar activist, to put gas in the tanks of the victimized peoples on their way to liberation. Okay, so I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Finley, for your, I'd say, wide-ranging speech, which gave us so many points for reflection. So thank you. Now, before going on, we have now some time for questions. If you have any questions, if you have any comments about the speeches and the contributes we've had today, so it's time if you want to add some comments or if you want to make some questions to other speakers. So if you have not No. Okay. So since there are no other questions, no comments, we can go on with the final part of this conference, which is dedicated to the closing remarks, which made by the president of Fight Impunity, Pierantonio Panzeri. I would like to remark and that his speech will be in Italian. So if you want to listen to it in English, you just have to select the English translation. Okay? So, Mr. Antonio Panzeri, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Lascio la parola.
Grazie a tutti, a a coloro che hanno partecipato a questo nostro incontro.
For taking part in this conference, which I think is essential, is very important. I won't take long. I would like to highlight the main remarks that we can work on in the next few weeks. First of all, I'd like to say that this issue, together with the Hong Kong and Taiwan issues, really describes or is an example of the relationship between Europe and China. And from what I heard, it is a kind of relationship that was never easy and or linear. As you all know, the region that we're talking about, which is under the Chinese control, it has been under Chinese control since the 18th century, and it's also very strategical from the point of view of transport and means of transport. So we need to be aware of the fact that it is a very important region for the foreign politics for Beijing, especially if we think, for example, about the Belt and Road Initiative. And even before 2014, China has been trying to control this region more and more and trying to fight against or to limit the Uyghurs' culture and presence. In 1989, Uyghurs accounted for 75% of the population in this region, and the Han Chinese accounted for 7%. Nowadays, Uyghurs account for 48%, and Han Chinese account for 36%. So I would say that after the attacks, Beijing tried to use these attacks as a justification for their campaigns in this region, and all the things you've talked about, so the camps, the re-education camps as they're called, I would say that the communist representative Olian that talked to the United Nations, he talked about the standardization of the human behavior, which is a good example of what their position is. So we're talking about different kinds of restrictions and different activities like sterilization of women. And there is also a surveillance method based on new technologies, because you all know that there are so many checkpoints spread all over the region. Then passports are taken away. Then there is a birth control campaign that according to which the government can select the number of people within a family. Then we have the collection of data, then forced labor, the working conditions of workers in factories. In some cases, we have detention centers. in Qingdao, for example, where Nike shoes are produced, are made, and these areas are limited, people cannot exit. There are 83 factories or companies that use these forced labor, and many of them are Western companies. So I think that all these examples are enough for us to wonder how some people are still doubtful when it comes to accepting or recognizing this genocide. I think we're talking about kind of dystopy from like Orwell. We're talking about people that are denying what's going on. I think we should reflect on so many aspects, and I would like to remind you, maybe also to ask speakers what they think about it. So basically, the European Parliament has been banned by China. Maybe many members, European Parliament members, were declared as persona non grata in that country. So I think we have the need at a European level to go over an idea of differentiation of human rights. So basically, if we are facing a strong country, then we feel weak. And it's the same the other way around. But I think that we need to be consistent with our policies. And I would like to ask Mrs. Gregorova whether it would be possible, because I think that the Uyghurs case can be an example of these. Well, would it be possible to have a pilot project for the European Union which aims at collecting data for lawyers in order to start maybe an investigation or a process to denounce these crimes to the criminal court, the International Criminal Court? I think that the United Nations and the European Union have the possibility to go there and visit the region. It's something that it hasn't happened in a long time. The last time it happened, there was a huge surveillance carried out by the Chinese authorities. We need to double check what the financial possibilities of the European Union are when it comes to China. And lastly, I think that we would have to denounce publicly all those Western companies that are involved in this process. Well, this is what we would like to do, of course, together with you and with the institutions, the European institutions, first of all, and mainly with the European Parliament. It's a kind of project or work that we can carry out together, also to start a new collaboration path so as to make sure that this tragedy is not forgotten. It should actually be something we work on every day in order to fight against human rights violation. I think this is what I wanted to highlight, and I would like to thank you all again for your participation.
Thank you, Mr. Panzeri, for your speech and for having made a point of what we have spoken about during this conference. So I would like to thank all of you again for having taken part in this conference. I would like to thank all of you speakers. I would like to, at the end of the conference, say thank you to the ones who helped me in organizing this conference, Nikita, Simona, and Julian, and also to the interpreter, Giacomo. So thank you, and have a nice day. We, of course, are going to make a follow-up of what we have discussed today, and we will keep you updated about it.